we were talking about Almost Grown, and I just asked you about licensing the music, and it seems that was a difficult thing to do.
People weren't doing a lot of that then. In television, they were not doing it at all, really. In fact, when I had done Off the Minnesota Strip, I decided, I wrote it and produced it. Root Media was the executive producer. The director was Lamont Johnson. Did a great job. Great DP, Don Morgan. And I said that we should have no music in the thing at all. Now, there is a school of thought that does that. In fact, I really didn't like movie music. Once I noticed it was there, I never liked it. And where I really got to dislike it was when I went on to the Rockford Files, and I was a producer, and we would go to these spotting sessions, which is where they decide to put where the music is going to go, where it isn't going to go. And the composers are there. Two very talented guys, Mike Post and anyway, Post is the only one who sort of remained there the whole time. But they just would throw that, that Rockford, that skank guitar on everything. I was like, oh, will you stop? But I would try to and those music cues were driving me crazy. And I would and then they were sort of angry at me because the shows that I produced had less of their music in it. And I became very aware of how much I didn't like music at all in movies. And as a matter of fact, just the other day, I read somewhere that Louis Buñuel, who's a filmmaker I really admire, never used music. And I'd never even noticed that about his movies. And the filmmakers that I really do like, Kubrick, I mean, I love a lot of filmmakers, but Kubrick, Coppola, Scorsese, it's all just, it's they get records and they play records, and that's what I like doing. And so when we were going to do Minnesota Strip, that's what I said. I said we should have no music at all. And then they said, well, you have to have some music. I said, well, then we should license music. We should get records and play them, because it's about this young girl and it's about hookers, and it should have a real feel to it.
In the selection of the songs, were you very specific about the lyrics? Were you really looking at the lyrics? Or was
Not always. Sometimes it's not about the lyrics at all. Sometimes it's about the feeling of the song. On The Sopranos, my colleague Martin Brucey and I, he was much more. Martin's really really talented and really smart, and I've met him on Northern Exposure, where they also use music. But Martin felt I was a little too lyric dependent. I mean, he may be right about that. That I was too. I would use the lyrics to explain things dramatically, where he wanted to be more of the music. Although, for me, it's never just the lyrics. It has to be a combination of the song. Just hopefully does something other than just dialogue would ever do, or any other kind of information dispersal.
How did Almost Grown do?
It was canceled after 8 episodes. And it was just starting to develop a following also. And I think the fix was in. It cost too much. It was expensive. Between the music and just the production values we had, and also the period, going back, having shows that took place in the present and also in the 60s, the wigs, the clothes, the cars, the music, and I think Universal actually it was doing very badly, and then it started to pick up, and it started to get some good reviews, mid-season reviews, and I think Universal went to CBS and said, "Kill this thing for us, and we'll give you a private detective show or something."
Because it was so expensive?
Yeah, I think so.
Did they ask you to use their music?
No. By that time that was all. It was all. People were sort of learning that whole thing of how to license music and how to do it, hopefully a little less expensively. And now it's completely open season, and people know what they're doing. The problem with it is, back then, even during the time of Almost Grown. The problem with licensing music for a television show is Universal, I guess rightly so, would only do it if they could license it in perpetuity. In other words, they didn't want to just license it for the first 2 shows, because then they have to go back and take it out, which for them meant money. To me, that meant, well, it's not going to be what it was. So they were right. But that licensing in perpetuity costs. You know, guys would make a deal, oh, okay, we'll do it for the first 2 runs, but then if you want it forever, oh, well, that's... And so that was always the big fight.
Did the bands have to give script approval or know about what the episode was about before
No.
they would?
No. Very seldom have I ever had. I don't think I've ever had that.
Did you have that at all in The Sopranos?
No. There are, I believe, right now, I think, for example, I think like the Hendrix estate. I believe the deal is if your show has anything to do with drugs, violence against women, murder, forget it. You're not going to get it. That's what I've heard. Which is kind of refreshing, really. I think it's, and I think there's a few others. I think we used the Stones a couple of times. Yeah, maybe. We had to get the Stones. I think we had to actually get the Stones permission. And there are people we've had to get permission from, but they don't have to read it necessarily, but they just have to get someone who associated with them may have to read it and give an okay. Then in The Sopranos, of course, the guy in Journey said that he had to approve the use of that song at the end based on what was happening, and that I showed him the script or something. That never happened.
It didn't happen?
No.
Okay, so from Almost Grown, did you go to I'll Fly Away? Was that your next production?
Yeah, I think so.
How did you get on that?
I got on that because I left Universal and I signed a deal with Lorimar, it's a TV company at that time, which was a subsidiary of Warner Brothers. And I don't know if I said this the first time we met, that my approach, my whole strategy, my whole desire was to be in the movie business. It was not to be in the TV business. And in fact, when I finally sold a series, which was Almost Grown, I called up my agent, and he said, "Congratulations." I said, "You got to get me, this is the end of my life. You have to get me out of here." They bought the series. He said, "Well, that's the way it's supposed to go." I said, "Now I'm stuck." Well, I wasn't stuck. It was 8 episodes, and I was free as a bird. But, so, I went over to Lorimar, and I wrote 3 pilots. Because I had won an Emmy, and because I'd had a show on the air, I made a good deal at Lorimar. And my idea all the time was that I would take this TV development money, at the same time write features. This would subsidize the writing of motion pictures, which is what I did. Unfortunately, none of those features ever got made. But at Lorimar, I was even having trouble I wrote 3 or 4 pilots. And I was having trouble getting anything. Nothing was, so they spent a lot of money on me in 2 years over there and got nothing out of it.
What kind of pilots were you writing?
One of them was about an Italian-American police chief in New Jersey with a wife and a son and a daughter in the suburbs of New Jersey who had a bad attitude and was unhappy all the time and complaining and yelling. And he was diagnosed with this disease. It was a kind of semi-real disease, which if he didn't keep his cool, it was going to kill him. So it was this, does it sound familiar? It's kind of like, really, is The Sopranos all over again. But I didn't realize that when I did The Sopranos. Anyway, so there's that. Then I did one which was suggested by ABC about 2 people who were writing a detective show. And it would go between the story of them and their kids and their life, and you'd also follow the fictional hero in his exploits. And I think the ABC guy who suggested that had sort of ripped it off from a Broadway play called City something, I don't know. And I wrote that, and I wrote one about a superhero, a contemporary superhero whereby life was so complicated in the current day that he had a staff of like lawyers and PR people and all that stuff to handle all that stuff for him. Because, for example, he in the pilot he took a piece of a mountain and crushed some terrorists. But the repercussions from that made some ski lift nearby fall down, and people had fallen off the ski lift and been paralyzed for life, and they were suing him for that. So he had a lawyer. He was fighting that case, and he had all these. In other words, it was supposed to be about a superhero who was, hemmed in by bureaucracy and image making and all that. And that was actually pretty good. And none of these things.
Well, it seems like it could go right now.
They've kind of milked that thing to death. I think the superhero thing. Maybe it could. I enjoyed that. That would have been fun. But none of those things went. So I was 4 of them. And so to answer your question, so I'd come to the end of my 2 years and I had nothing to show for it. And then John Falsey and Josh Brand had sold a show called I'll Fly Away, and I read about it in the trades. I would read about the shows that had sold, none of which were mine. And then I'd get depressed. And I was in my office lying on the couch, and I had read what I'll Fly Away was about. It took place in the early 60s in the South, and my assistant said, John Falsey on line 1 for you. And I said, they want me to run that show, I'll bet. And that's what it was.
Had you met them before?
I had Universal. I'd met them, just say hello to a couple of times. I think, yeah, Josh Brand had called me up to say to me, no, John Falsey had called me once to say to make sure that I didn't dent his Jaguar with my car door, because we had parking spots next to each other. So I met them through that. So we sort of knew of each other's existence, and I just had they were doing Northern Exposure, so I knew that when they sold the second show, they were probably going to be looking for an executive producer. But and then when he called me, I thought, no, that's probably what it is, and that's what it was.
What do you think they saw in you?
I think Josh was looking for people. Josh, I don't know about John. I think they just liked my writing. In fact, the day that when I was back at Universal, that John Falsey called me about, don't be careful when you open your car door, don't dent my Jaguar. I remember hearing Josh Brand in the background saying, don't say that for Christ's sake, or something like that. And then so I said, all right, I'll be very careful, excuse me. And John said, hold on, Josh Brand wants to talk to you. So Josh got on and he said, listen, and he talked about some show that I always liked that show. That's what he said. And that's all I knew about them. So I guess they just liked the writing.
And talk about being the head of that show.
I wasn't really the head of that show because Josh was there for a little while, but then he went off to do, he stayed more on, he was really running Northern. And John and I ran Northern Exposure, I'll Fly Away together the first season, and then he also went off, and it was mine to run the second season. I loved that show.
How did your sensibilities mesh with it?
I had gone to school. I had gone to college in 1964 in North Carolina when all that stuff was happening, the Freedom Rides and Ku Klux Klan and sit-ins and segregation. So I actually lived in a segregated state, and I thought this is probably the only time I've ever thought this. I thought this is worth doing. If you have a child, this is worth doing. That people should know about this history, and it really worked well for my sensibility. I really enjoyed doing that. And which reminds me, the reason that I didn't get anything sold. The reason I never had any movies sold, and also the reason I never sold anything at Lorimar, was because I was too dark. And dark is a ridiculous concept, doesn't mean it. You know what dark really means? Complicated, complex. That's what it means. Because certainly there are plenty of things that are dark that are commercial. But I'll Fly Away was dark. It was sad. Very sad show.
We'll talk about some of those elements.
Well, it was about this woman, this maid, who worked for, not a high school graduate, and she worked for a district attorney in a small southern town. She was a maid. You know, even in whenever that was in the 1990s, that was, and I think there were a lot of African Americans who disliked that show because they disliked seeing an African American woman in that subservient position. We used to get a lot of bad mail. And she was just a maid, but she was a young woman, and so she began to develop a political consciousness. At the same time, she was a surrogate mother to these children who their mother had gone nuts and been hit by a car or something. So she was a surrogate mother to these children, but for a long time the insane mother was at an institution, still alive, and the kids would go out there on Sundays. It was very, very heartbreaking. It was tough stuff.
Was the arc plotted out much in advance in terms of the chronology of the actual times?
I don't recall. Not really. I mean, we knew it was no. In fact, it was a little bit. There was a little bit of a problem because they'd made the pilot, and we couldn't. I couldn't tell what year it was, and because it was a historical show, that began to be problematic because you'd say, well, wait a minute. I mean, the Voting Rights Act happens in '64, so this is pre the Voting Rights Act. They had done research, but they hadn't done all that much, and it was Josh Brand's feeling that the history should not be front and center. The family should be front and center. And he was very much against using, like doing scenes where dogs attack black people or fire hoses. We finally did that because that's what happened. But they had never really worked out the chronology. So it was supposed to be like 1959, but that wasn't quite what was happening in 1959. So then we had to, I think in the second season, sort of update it somehow, or pull a fast one.
How did the show do overall?
The show never did really well. And NBC hated it. And they did everything they could to either sell it the wrong way or get it bounced off the air. We had, I think, in 2 years, I think we had 5 different time slots. One of which was Friday at, can you imagine, Friday at 9 o'clock for a show like that? When people just want to, it's escapist night. They bounced us all over the place. They had no respect for it. And they claimed they had a lot of respect. Oh, this is a wonderful show about civil rights. And it was way too soft for them. It was way too smart for them. It was way too historical for them. They on some level, I don't think they liked the content, that it was African American struggle, because they knew that there was a lot of people in the South and elsewhere who probably hated the show. So they never gave it a chance. And then it was canceled in the second season, I think 17 episodes in.
Did you work closely with the cast on that show, Sam?
But again, I must say, it was starting to pick up speed. It was starting to gather momentum, at which point they canceled it.
Sorry to ask you, did you work closely with the cast on that show?
Yeah. I directed a couple episodes too, so I would go down there occasionally. I wasn't there a lot. The script, the writing, and the editing post-production was done in L.A., and the unit was down in Atlanta.
So where were you spending most of your
Most of the time I was in L.A., but I would go down to Atlanta fairly, fair amount of time. And then when I directed, I think 2 episodes, I was there for that. I really, really liked that show.
What did you do after it left the air? Was that Northern Exposure?
Yeah, my deal at Lorimar was up after that. So that Universal came around again. I went to there was some other place. I was at a place called Comworld too, sometime in the 80s, I guess. I forget. Nothing ever happened there. It was a fabrication of Creative Artists Agency. They made this. There was a bunch of Mormon dentists who had a big pistachio ranch and a lot of money. And CAA tried to bought the Osmond Stages or something, and then tried to make a TV production company out of it. It wasn't a good match.
What kind of things were you doing for them?
I was trying to develop TV shows. I forget what I did. Some kind of off the wall private eye show that didn't go. A story about 5 people who graduate high school in New Jersey that didn't go. Nothing. I don't think they had anything on the air ever.
Were you still also trying to get a movie?
That was the whole thing. I mean, I was when I came out of I guess was when I first came out of Universal. There was, because I'd won the Emmy, as I said before, I was desirable for every studio in town. They all wanted me to do TV series. So I had offers from all those major studios, and the highest one was this company, Comworld. So I took that because I thought, well, I'll make the most amount of money, plus they'll have the least amount of success, which will leave me free to do the movies. And that's the way it worked out. But again, the movies didn't get made. So you can overthink these things.
Okay, and then from there you went to...
Got what I deserved, bro.
So from there you went to Northern Exposure? Is that...
No, from there I went to Lorimar. No, from there I went to Universal to do Almost Grown. Then from Universal to Lorimar, I'll Fly Away, and then back to Universal again. And I was at Universal again, and that was another development deal. Not a very, much less of it. They were on to me by this time. So I wasn't making as much money. It was a lowball deal. But then they needed somebody to run Northern Exposure, so they asked me.
How was that for you?
That was really not my kind of show. I have to say that was the only time I've done something purely for money. It was then.
What made it not your kind of show?
I didn't buy it. I didn't buy the premise. I didn't like the humor. I thought it was self-congratulatory. I thought it was smug, soft. Other than that, it's a good TV show. I've said this. I mean, I've been honest about it. It was not my. It was just. It had no. There was something cute and precious about it that I just couldn't abide.
And how were you able to negotiate that in terms of actually working on the show?
The good part of it was is that the people who were working for me were people that I'd worked with in the past. Andy Schneider and Diane Froloff, although I never worked with Diane before. I'd worked with Andy before. Robin Green. So I knew those people, and we had worked together on Almost Grown. So that was fun. And I liked Jeff Melvoin worked there, and I liked him, and I brought Barbara Hall over for a while, and that didn't work out. But I liked working with those people. And I never did any writing on that show. I did story, but I never did any writing. I didn't know how to write it. I didn't get it. It was supposed to be something like, it was supposed to be, Sicily, Alaska was a non-judgmental universe. That was the directive from Brandon Falsey. And I thought to myself, well, okay, non-judgmental universe. Now, drama, I think as I learned in third grade, is about conflict. So how do people have conflicts if they don't judge each other? And I found the underpinnings of it false, and I couldn't work with it. So all I did was think up stories that were just sort of, and now, so where did I say? So maybe it was on Wikipedia. It blamed me for getting it canceled, that I took it in a dark direction. The show actually canceled itself because of Rob Morrow didn't want to be on the show anymore.
So you were there when Paul Proenza came in?
Yes, that was a band-aid we tried to put on. Yeah, Rob just didn't want to be in the show anymore, and was trying to, how do we keep, and it was a success though, so they wanted to keep it going. So Andy and Diane and I we were the executive producers then, tried to figure out some things, and it didn't work. And I guess, it probably did get darker. That is kind of, I've been very blunt about the fact that whatever that show was not the way I work. And so I tried to be respectful of what they were doing and work within what the goal was. It was very whimsical. And just like The Night Stalker, that whimsy stuff is hard to come up with. And, we began to scrape the bottom of the Indian legend barrel,
When Paul Proenza came in, do you think that also affected the viewership in that sense?
Sure, but there was nothing we could do. They wanted us to do it. The studio said, we want you to get Rob's going to leave, you got to get another doctor. We all said, why don't we just stop? Come on, this isn't going to work. No. It's a popular show, we need so much for syndication, the whole thing.
Why did you stay on it? If it was
Money. Money. I enjoyed working with my friends, and it was a financial decision. As I say, it was the first and so far only time I've done something for money.
And what did you do after the show ended?
What did I do? Oh yeah, there was The Rockford Files was going to come back on the air in a series of 2-hour Rockford Files. And I think after that ended, I was gonna make a deal at Fox. And again, another development deal, in which I would go to work with Chris Carter, and I was gonna like run Millennium, I believe. But in between that, I did a brief stint where they were doing these Rockford Files 2-hour movies, and I wrote 2 and directed 1 of them. So I did that for
Punishment and Crime? was one of them?
Punishment and Crime was when I wrote, I think. No, I forget the one. I wrote and directed 1 and wrote 1. I don't remember which was which. It was not. It's not my best hour, certainly.
Okay. And is that about the time that The Sopranos started?
Right. Right. It's right. And so. Yeah, so that's what happened. So right after the Rockford Files thing, I went over to Burlstein Gray, another development deal. And it was a 2-year deal, and I wrote The Sopranos in the first year, and then a feature on my own also that year. And then the second year, I wrote another series for Mark Helgenberger, the pilot for CBS. That didn't go. And I was about, once again, 2 years down, nothing to show for it. And Brad Gray and my agents, Peter Benedek and Chris Harbert at the time, I think kept sort of pushing it. And Brad was in contact with HBO. When I wrote the first version of The Sopranos that I did was for Fox, like in 1990. I wrote it in, I don't know, 95 or something.
How did that come about, that version?
I had this development deal, and they said, so I had to come up with a series. And Lloyd Braun had said to me, how about, we want to do series that push the envelope. And how would you like to do The Godfather's TV series? And I said, I wouldn't want to do that. And then because I pictured a period thing with old cars and trench coats and, stuff like that. And I thought, I've seen The Godfather. I don't want to do that again. I don't want to do the cheap version of that. Then I was driving home, and I remembered I had this feature idea about a mafia guy with a difficult mother, and he was in therapy. And I thought, I wonder if that could be a TV series. It was supposed to be a movie. I'd envisioned it for like Anne Bancroft and Robert De Niro. And I thought, I wonder if that could be a series. And so that's how that all started. And so I wrote a script at Burlstein Gray. I wrote a script for Fox. Fox passed, and it just laid there.
Do you know why they passed on it?
Who knows?
Were the elements,
Too dark.
were the elements already there?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, as I was writing it, I thought to myself, how is this ever going to work on network television? And by the way, I didn't have a lot of the language in there. I had a few, curse words, and I had no murder in that. There was no one got killed in that pilot for Fox. But I remember doing it and thinking, this is going to be a train wreck of competing expectations. I'm going to believe I'm doing a mafia story. They're going to want me to be doing something where the mafia guy is helping the Central Intelligence Agency, ratting out his friends. So I thought, how are we going to? And so in the end, they just didn't like it.
Was it called The Sopranos at that point?
Yeah, it was. So it just hung around there, and at that time, back in '95, I said, well, can't we go to HBO with this? Seems like that'd be the place for it. And I got this answer like, no. And I guess the issue was money. HBO didn't want to spend enough money to do things, I think, at that time. Between 1995 and 1997, HBO changed their business model. Chris Albrecht and Jeff Bewkes took things in hand. They wanted to do more original programming. They knew Brad really well because Larry Sanders because they just all knew each other. Brad went back there with it. They read it. I did a rewrite for them. And that was that.
Now, why did you specifically say that HBO should do it initially?
I just thought we'd have a lot more freedom. That you would be able to have more. Well, it always seems like people think it's like sex and violence. That's not really what it's about. On television, creative freedom is the freedom to make human beings as human beings really are. And I thought, which you really don't get on the network. And I thought I'd have a better chance of doing that at HBO.
Were there any conditions by which you had to agree to in order to do it on HBO?
No. No, in fact, although I've told the story a million times, but during its Fox life, it had several sort of, it almost came gasping into life a couple of times during the prior. We went over to Fox, passed on it, then we went to CBS with it. And I remember the guy there said, look, the violence and the robbing and the violence, I got no problem with that, but does he have to be seeing a psychiatrist? I said, yeah. He said, you have to be taking Prozac? I said, yeah, this is not for us. So that happened everywhere.
Why? What's the stigma?
People want their gangsters straight up. They don't want a weak gangster. This is what they think. They want the gangster they've always seen. They want Michael Corleone. They don't want a new guy that they don't understand. Why? He's a weakling. His mother beats up on him. His mother controls him. He's worried about his mother. What kind of gangster is that? Fuck this guy. I don't like him. I don't care about him. That's how innovation never happens. But during that time, we were sort of planning for production purposes, and people would say to me, at various networks, they'd say, so what are you going to do? You're going to shoot the pilot in New Jersey and then bring it back here, shoot the series? And I said, no, I want to shoot it in New Jersey. You could see them just go like, this guy doesn't know what he's talking about. And then they'd say, oh, so you mean you're going to shoot the pilot in New Jersey and then bring it back here, and you'll do a couple of days a month out in New Jersey, like they do for NYPD Blue? And I said, no, I want to shoot it in New Jersey. How's that going to work? So none of them wanted to be bothered with that. Then I went over to HBO for my first meeting. At the end of it, Chris Albrecht says, now it says here it takes place in New Jersey. You're really going to shoot it there, right? So I knew I'd found my place.
No, why were you so adamant that it be shot in New Jersey?
Because nobody'd seen that. Because I grew up in New Jersey, and so the organized crime that I knew about took place in New Jersey. So I had a better chance of writing something that was organic and sort of real, and because that's where I grew up, and what I knew about organized crime from my own life had been there. And because we'd seen the mob in New York how many times. And I also wanted it to be more suburban. So all the things you saw in the final show, that was the reason it was done in New Jersey.
Now, how much had you seen about the mob growing up?
Well, you're not supposed to say this, but as an Italian American, you just hear about it all the time. When I was a kid, I had two cousins who were peripherally, one was very peripherally involved, he was a numbers runner, and then another guy who was involved enough so that I never quite knew what he did, and still don't. There was some guys that I went to high school, the parents of some people I went to high school with, two brothers, my father had a hardware store, and they had a quote unquote tailor shop up the street, which was a front for other things. So it's just there. And I'd always hear about my aunt went to a wedding, for example, of this mobster in New Jersey, and the lavish spread and the champagne fountain, and shootings in my old grandmother's neighborhood. So I just picked it up. It's there. So, and as I say, as an Italian American, you hear about it. It's 6 degrees of separation, less. And Italian Americans, some of them don't want to acknowledge this, but it is a part of that immigrant culture.
Did you get a lot of blowback from people that you grew up with and the Italian American community in general?
People I grew up with, no, I got no blowback. But the Italian Americans, I knew it. I knew they were going to raise hell about it, and they did.
In what way?
It's a stereotype. It demeans Italians. This makes us look stupid. This makes us look vulgar. We're not all mobsters. Why aren't we ever portrayed as anything other than gangsters? Um, Same old thing.
Did you take any of it to heart or do anything to
No.
address the situation?
No. We discussed it in the show. We had characters who were for who were anti-Italian defamation people. Like Melfi's husband was a guy who hated depictions of Italians as gangsters, and we did a whole show about Columbus Day, that whole mess, about because what happened was that we had actors on our show who had been riding in the Columbus Day on a float, a group called the Heart Share. It's a charity. And these guys had been riding on that float for years, actors. And then after The Sopranos came out, they were told they couldn't be on the float anymore. And Heart Share pulled the float, God bless them, rather than submit to that fascistic nonsense. So I found that really reprehensible. And I still do. And so we did a whole thing about Columbus Day, about, did the Indians say Columbus was a murderer that committed a genocide, and the Italians say he's the admiral of the ocean seas, he's our guy. So we did an episode about that.
Going back to the initial development, once HBO bought it, how much did they have to go on? Did you already have the first story arc plotted out? Or
No, I had a 1 hour pilot, which we shot, and they had a pilot to decide.
And you directed the pilot?
Yes.
Can you talk about creating that look, of the pilot of the show? What were you trying to do?
I don't remember anymore, honestly. I know it. I was trying to show New Jersey the way I knew it looked, but people hadn't really seen it. And I also wanted the show to be open. I wanted to leave it wide. And I wanted it to be pictorial. That's about all I remember about it.
And what to you does New Jersey represent in that world?
Well, New Jersey, it's not, in terms of the mob, you mean, or just in general?
Just in general, for you.
I always write better when I'm writing about, when I understand the place that I'm writing about. That's why I guess when I said that the thing that impressed me about Rockford Files was it seemed to be really taking place in Los Angeles, not in like a large city in the Southwest. It felt like Los Angeles. It smelled like Los Angeles. There were Los Angeles type characters in it. I always write better when I have that going for me. When I don't, I'm on shaky ground. I don't know what that is. I think maybe the first time we met, I told you I'd done on Minnesota Strip. I had a lot of trouble writing that screenplay. And I could not, I just had no feeling for it whatsoever. This teenage girl from Minnesota, and I'd been back in Minnesota. Teenage girl from Minnesota, and then I remember thinking that when I was back there, I'd seen like a stone bridge with a brook running through it. I thought that kind of looked like suburbs of New Jersey. And once I placed her there, in that terrain, I had no trouble. Because I guess it's just saying, well, so I understand her. She's just like people I knew. Of course, we're all the same. We're human beings, but I need to have that sense of place. And so that's what I wanted to have for the show.
But you've been gone for so long. You had lived out in Los Angeles for a very long time.
Right.
Did you come back and try to get that feeling back, or was it just always in you?
No, I mean, I came back. I drove around for a couple of days just to see the place again, and it just was always in me. I mean, like I say, I was an Italian American kid from there, and I still knew my relatives, and I knew how they speak, and I just felt it.
Were you happy with how the pilot came out?
I was. Yeah, I was. It was the first time I thought, wow, I think I did okay there.
Now, when it was first picked up, did you still think, oh, it's not a movie, it's, or was this something different?
Well, there was a little bit of that with The Sopranos. I thought, okay, we'll shoot the pilot, and I think we had like 65 minutes or so, 70 minutes, and we edited it down to an hour. And HBO did not go for this right away. They did not say, okay. They tested that pilot first. They had internal discussions. They weren't sure whether it was going to be expensive. They knew that. They weren't sure it was going to be good. They weren't sure they wanted to do it. And they tested it. So I thought, well, here's what we'll do. The testing will come back and nobody will like it. Too dark. And then I'll go to them and try to get another $500,000. Shoot another half hour, and then we can take it to film festivals. And I thought that's what would happen. Because it's HBO, they can also play it on their network as a movie. But that is not what happened, because the testing worked good enough for them to. In fact, I think they just disregarded the testing after they went through it. But they bought it as a series. And I did not feel the same way about it. I don't know why. I felt that this was very close to cinema. And I don't know why I felt differently. I think because I felt that you were being, all those TV compromises would not have to happen in terms of how the rhythm of the stories, and in terms of how, not only how people spoke and behaved, but just that things could be allowed to happen slowly over time, that there would be no commercials, you wouldn't have to write to commercial breaks, but I didn't think it would succeed. Most, this is not me being pessimistic or anything, most pilot scripts don't get made into pilots. Most pilots don't get made into series, and most series that get made don't last. That's just it's like the semen toward the egg. It starts out with 1,000 and only one gets there.
Okay, we're talking about, HBO disregarded the...
Yeah, they disregarded the research and bought it.
So once they bought it, how much did you do to create the story arcs, the long arcs? How much did you know in advance?
The first season was, I had this idea for a feature, which I say was about a low-level wise guy, mid-level wise guy with a problematic mother, an unhappy guy, with this sort of crazy mother who puts her in a nursing home, and she hates him for that. And he is taking the very unusual step for a mobster of seeking psychotherapy because of his mother. And that the movie would progress, and the therapist, and there'd be some sort of a gang war, okay, a power struggle. And that the therapist, because of her insights and because of hearing him talk, would be the first one to realize that his true enemy was his mother, that his mother was in league with his uncle. And that he would then go to confront his mother, and she would already be dead. That was going to be the feature. So that's all that the first season was. It was that same story, just stretched out over 13 episodes.
So she was going to be dead?
She was going to be dead originally, yeah. But a couple of things happened. Number one, she was so great. We didn't want to do that. And number two, she was ill and had said that she wanted to keep working, that it was important for her life force. So, we didn't want to lose her anyhow.
Let's talk about the creation of the character, starting with Tony Soprano. Starting with the name, where did the Soprano name come from?
I went to high school with some people named Soprano in New Jersey.
And Tony?
His name originally was Tommy. Just a name. I don't know. I had an Uncle Tommy who was the black sheep of the family. I guess I named him for him. People have said that he was originally named Tommy because of Tommy Powers in Public Enemy, which I've said is a very influential movie on me, which is true. But he wasn't really named Tommy after Tommy Powers. And people have also said, can you imagine that it was some sort of a compromise that I had made, that I hadn't called it. Anyway, the only reason it was called Tony was because there was already a Tommy Soprano in New Jersey, and so legally, they don't want you to do that. They want you to change it to something. So we, all right, what's his name? Tony. I remember Jim saying, Tony, Christ. I'm getting used to Tommy. So it wasn't that big of a deal.
Did you base him on anyone you knew?
I guess he's mostly based on my father.
What
Some things
traits-
about me, I guess.
Yeah, what traits do you think that he took from you and your father?
Well, more my father, I suppose. I mean, the whole thing about the mother, that's me. That's me and my mother. Tony Soprano and his mother is kind of me and my mother. But the character of Tony's character traits are sort of like my father.
And what distinguishes the character?
What
distinguishes the character for you?
Tony?
Mm-hmm.
He means well, but he doesn't do well. That's all.
What about his work ethic?
Yeah, he has a big work. Yes, that's true. Tony has a work ethic. And to go back to Stephen Cannell, Tony's always the smartest guy in the room. I remember, I think told you that Stephen said that Rockford should always be the smartest guy in the room. So maybe he doesn't like to get punched, and maybe he's not a tough guy detective, and he chickens out of fights, but he's always smart. Tony Soprano also was always the smartest guy in the room.
Why was that important for this character, for the show?
I wanted him to be a good at what he did. I wanted to be an effective, smart mob boss, which meant that the money would come rolling in. That he would come up with scams, and he would manage his people such that his kick was always full.
Or his weaknesses?
You know, sentimentality, pathological liar, glutton, but like the guy at CBS said, the murder and the robbery, that's not a big thing.
What made him watchable?
James Gandolfini.
And how did he get the role?
He came through casting, or casting people. Georgianne Walken and Sheila Jaffe. His career was on the move as a character. I don't know if he had done leads yet, but his career was on the move. He'd done a lot of movies. Get Shorty, and what's the one? The famous Oliver Stone movie. I can't think of the name of it, with Patricia Arquette. He was happening, but as a character actor in films. He came in and he read.
Did you know it was him?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Is that who you pictured when you were writing the character?
No, I never picture anybody.
What did he bring to the role?
Oh boy. He's just. I wouldn't even know where to begin. Depth. It's all in his eyes. He's got that face, he's got that intelligence, he's got those feelings, and they're right there. So despite the fact that he never says one true thing, you can see what's going on in his face. Despite the fact that Tony never says one true thing. And that's actually how The Sopranos work. Nothing that anybody said there. That's the reason it was fun to write. Because usually when you're writing what people are thinking or feeling. In The Sopranos, you're always writing what they're not thinking or feeling. It's always, everything they say is a lie. Every line is almost a lie. I didn't leave the door open. Whatever it is, they never take responsibility for anything. And that's for all those characters.
Now you directed the pilot. What did you give? Did you give James any advice or tell him anything about the character going in that first time?
I don't remember. I mean, I directed, but there was direction going on. He wanted advice. He sought it out. He sought direction out. we didn't go into an analysis of any large character analysis. He read the script. We had a couple of days of rehearsal. We rehearsed the scenes with him and with Tony and Melfi. That was a total, I think that was probably maybe a quarter of this pilot script. So that was a lot of work. So we rehearsed that. Because, and the thing about that is that it was a lot of, I wanted to make sure that they understood that there'd be a lot of silence, that he would say something and she would not respond, and not respond, and not respond, and not respond, and then when he didn't say anything else, then she might prompt him a little bit. That took a long time to get that rhythm down.
And why was that important to you? Where did that come from?
Therapy.
Of yourself?
Yeah.
Did you bring a lot of that in with you to?
Oh, a
the
huge
writing?
amount, yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, Melfi was based on a therapist. I had Lorraine Kaufman. Actually, her husband was a very respected member of the Writers Guild, Millard Kaufman.
Did she know that
I think she
you
did.
used the
Yeah, I think so. I would say it in every interview, and they never would print it. Wasn't interesting. She said that, who's that?
How close?
What's it like working with Lorraine Bracco?
How close was she to Dr. Melfi?
Very close. Initially, she was very close. That was her method. That was her, actually. That was Lorraine Kaufman. As time went on, Tony's sociopathy sort of made therapy kind of useless in his case. So it became less like Lorraine.
Did you personally find the therapy helpful? I mean,
Yeah.
for you?
Yes.
Would you find yourself quoting things that were said in therapy? That
Oh,
actually-
absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely, sure. Yeah. We from the beginning, we started to sort of like smack therapy around a little bit and make fun of it. But it had been a help. I don't know. I don't really know. Can therapy really solve your problems? I think these problems are spiritual and not psychological. So I guess not. But it can help, especially in crisis.
Did you bring in experts? To
No.
help with that?
Robin Greene's brother. So when I say no, that's not exactly experts, not plural. Robin Greene's brother is a psychiatrist at Dartmouth, and she would call him once in a while.
Now, those scenes in those sessions were very different from the outside world. Was that intentional? In the sense of how the way the office was, the way that the scenes were slower, the silences?
Yes. Mm-hmm. Well, in therapy, as I remember therapy, you can't hide in a therapy setting. You can, but you can't change the subject. In regular discourse, if something awkward happens, we'll sort of be glad to be taken off the subject, or joke our way out of it, or have to leave, or do whatever. That doesn't happen in therapy. Change the subject, or therapy, it's just, if you do that, they come after you again. So, that's the whole purpose of it.
Yeah. Well, so in writing it, was it difficult? How do
No,
you make it filmically interesting?
no, it wasn't filmically interesting. It's not filmically interesting. In fact, we had I did have a rule about that. I said there was no camera movement allowed during the therapy scenes. No dolly shots.
And what was your reasoning for that?
Because I don't know how to explain it exactly. In a typical television show, and someone is in therapy, maybe it's changed now, even though they're saying this isn't what it is, even though they are digressing, let's say, the camera starts to push in a little bit, and you start to hear that little synthesizer pad. So it tells you, oh, this is important. But I didn't want that. I didn't want to tell the audience, this is important, this is real, this matters to him.